Closet, a Todd Mills mystery. Book 1. Author R.D. Zimmerman. Publisher Scribble Pub. Minneapolis, Minnesota. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 12. Todd stayed at Maggie's much too long. It was after 4:30 by the time he made it back into town, and he could feel the exhaustion creeping like a numbing drug up his arms and legs. He knew he needed to sleep, yet he couldn't imagine closing his eyes or finding any kind of tranquility, because the closer he drew to home, the more he feared what he was about to find. As he turned Janice's Prelude onto the wooded Dean Parkway, he scanned the area in front of his building, and there it was, just as he'd pictured it. The next in this string of nightmares. A group of 8, maybe 10, people were gathered on the sidewalk like a band of Union picketers. Todd clenched the steering wheel, but focused on his destination, drawing close and turning into the drive. He took a deep breath, steeling himself just as a thin older man in a white shirt and tie turned his way, pointing at the small red car with an accusatory finger. "All homosexuals will go to hell!" he shouted, waving a Bible in his other hand. Todd quickly closed his window, and it was soon apparent that the group was by no means united. 2 men in short plaid kilts and crowns of flowers, obviously from the fringe gay group Radical Fairies, jumped forward and blew Todd kisses. Next, a woman in a long, billowy dress lifted up a sign that read, "I love you, Todd Mills. Marry me." Todd's entire body tightened like a single muscle, and he headed up the drive, stomping on the gas and speeding past them all. As he left them shouting in his wake, he wondered, was this just the beginning? "Oh, Christ," he thought, his head pounding. While before he'd hidden his sexuality so well, now it was being rubbed and smeared in his face. As he passed the lobby, he saw the security guard, Bob, a beefy, handsome blonde man, stepping out the front door. Todd had always had a crush on this young man, and Bob had always been, until recently anyway, exceedingly friendly toward Todd. Either because Todd was famous or because Bob was queer, and he sensed Todd was too. That still wasn't clear, especially since one night last month when Bob had delivered a UPS parcel to Todd's apartment. When gorgeous Bob had lingered and wanted to talk, Todd had nearly panicked, saying he was working on a story and didn't have a moment. So was Bob stepping out now to make sure Todd had safe entry to his home, or had he come to gawk and stare with disdain at Todd, the homo killer? Todd stopped by the door and opened the car window. He looked at Bob and cleared his throat. Have they been out there long?" asked Todd, referring to the demonstrators. Bob didn't even look at Todd as he muttered, "All afternoon." "Anyone from the media around?" Bob shrugged, then stepped back, retreating into the lobby. "Great," thought Todd. He continued up the ramp and into the garage, where he parked Janice's car. He glanced around the vast, dark space before climbing out, eyed no one, and then got the elevator up to the 15th floor. As the doors opened, he was pleased that there hadn't been any journalists lurking about. Now at least he'd be able to retreat to the confines of his 2-bedroom condo, where he could barricade himself behind a locked door. Maybe he'd even unplug the phone, something he usually hated doing for fear of missing something, anything. Thinking of the phone as he walked down the long corridor, he reached into the pocket of his sport coat and felt nothing. Then he touched his shirt pocket. It too was empty. So where was it? Had he left his beeper down at the police station? Wait, no, he recalled checking it last night, just after he pulled up in front of Michael's. Had he tossed it aside, broken it? Right, he'd thrown it across the car. But that didn't matter now. He'd probably be fired from Channel 7 anyway, and he most certainly wouldn't get the promotion. Nearing his place, he reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a key. As he went to unlock his door, though, he froze. What was that? He heard a mumbled voice, some rustling. Todd turned, glanced down the hall. Was someone coming out of another apartment? Or was he merely hearing something from one of the neighbors? No, it was coming from his own place. His heart flushed with concern, and he was very still. It sure as hell was coming from within his apartment. He heard talking. Yes, there were at least two people in there, conferring about something as quietly and carefully as he could. He leaned forward, pressed his ear against the thick wooden door. He couldn't discern what was being said, and he moved over, tried peering through the peephole. A black blob of a figure crossed the room, temporarily blocking the light. This couldn't be anyone from the station, could it? Dear God. Had he given his key to anyone at Channel 7? Sure, not long ago he'd given a complete extra set to Mark Buchanan so he could drop by and pick up a videotape. So was this some sort of cheap stunt? Were they now in there filming his place? He slowly twisted the knob and found the door unlocked. Carefully he eased open the door. Where were they? Who were they? He took a half step in, paused, moved a little bit further. The door to the kitchen was on the right, and he hesitated, peered around the corner. Although the kitchen was dark and empty, several drawers were pulled all the way open, and a couple of things were spread out on the counter. Fuck, thought Todd. This wasn't the television crew. He was being robbed. Found something? Called an amused voice down the hall. Sock drawer syndrome. Todd froze in disbelief, for he most surely recognized the voice. The next instant he exploded with rage and charged down the narrow hall, past the first bedroom, which he used as an office, and to the second, his bedroom. He tore through the door, saw a woman with short blonde hair reaching into his sock drawer and pulling out a plastic container of lubricant, some condoms, and a glossy magazine full of naked men. An hysterical burst of panic overwhelmed him. What the hell are you doing? Screamed Todd. His left hand was out, ready to grab it. He plowed forward on out-of-control anger surging through him. But just as the woman spun around, and before she could even raise her hands in defense, another figure came barreling out of the walk-in closet. Todd didn't see him until it was too late. Until the guy smashed into his side, which sent Todd hurtling through the air onto the bed. Every bit of wind was knocked out of him, and he doubled over, gasped for breath. And then they were upon him, both of them pinning him down. Todd caught some air, bucked, and screamed, but within a matter of a few short moments, he couldn't move. Get out of here, gasped Todd. You have no goddamn right. Take it easy, yelled Detective Lewis, her knee on his left shoulder. You can't do this. You can't be in here. You can't go through my things. We've got a search warrant, asshole, hollered Rawlings, who was on top of Todd's other shoulder and arm. You know what a fucking search warrant is, don't you? But we showed it to you last night, said Lewis. We told you it was for everything. Body, house, work. Towering over Todd, Rawlings added, It's a court order. There's nothing you can do. Nothing. We're just doing our jobs, so cool it. Cool it, man. We've got to do this. There's nothing you can do. Gradually it sunk in. Of course, there wasn't. Not a blessed thing, and when they finally let go of him, Todd could barely move. He rolled onto his side, just lay there on top of his down comforter, wanting nothing more than to fall into a screaming, crying fit. But he didn't. Don't worry, said Lewis, catching her breath. This is nothing unusual. Todd eyed the magazine of naked guys lying there across the bed, and he lifted an arm to take it. Rawlings grabbed the magazine and threw it aside. Forget it, man, snapped Rawlings. We can take whatever we like. Now, go on, get out of here. It was all too much, and like a beaten dog, Todd disappeared, retreating to the living room where he pulled an overstuffed chair up to the window. He sat there, lost in shock and staring at Lake Calhoun, while Detective Lewis and Rawlings went through the drawers of his dresser, his closet, his medicine cabinet, his desk, his files, and bills. Sure, they told him about this. It just hadn't registered. He knew what a search warrant was, of course. He just hadn't realized it would mean this humiliation. Todd sat in the fading light, staring out over the oval lake for another half hour or so. He watched as a ring of park lights around the lake was illuminated, and as car lights came on too. Finally, he heard their voices behind him, heard them zipping up their jackets. Todd glanced back briefly and saw that they had gathered 3 large plastic bags of stuff. We're going to be on our way, called Rawlings from the entry hall. I'm sorry about this. We thought you were going to be home all afternoon. We thought you'd be here. We didn't mean to surprise you, but we had to do it today. Todd didn't move, and his voice was faint. Uh, oh, well, we have a few things, Rawlings continued. Don't worry. We'll take good care of it all. You'll get it back. We're going to have to go down to your office, too. By the way, do you have a computer there? Yes. Well, we'll have to print out all of your files. Sure. Go right ahead. Take the whole fucking thing. Staring out at the car lights as they moved around the lake, Todd asked, how did you get in there? Did the security guard let you in with his pass key? No. Actually, I had copies of your keys made. How convenient. Rawlings asked, say, where were you this afternoon? At Michael's sister's. Todd saw the lights of a plane heading toward the airport. Anything else you want to know, like when I arrived there and when I left, or when I last took a leak? Yeah, actually, I do. I have one more question, said Rawlings, lowering his voice. Are you going to be all right? Eat shit! The door shut a minute later, and Todd sat motionless. He'd always expected that he or Michael would die of AIDS. He'd feared the disease so much that he was sure that that was their fate. He'd confessed that worry to Michael once, and Michael had said, Don't be silly. It was primarily a heterosexual disease. They had nothing to fear, for they were healthy and their relationship secure. Come on, you idiot, chin up. If people see you as full of shame, then that's what you'll get in return. Michael had begun, launching into his favorite lecture about how others perceive you. And just remember, you don't die of AIDS just because you're gay, right? Apparently, thought Todd, AIDS hadn't killed Michael. A knife had. A knife wielded by whom? The phone rang and the sound cleared away his thoughts. He didn't budge, though the answer machine would get it. The phone rang on and on. However, before the caller finally hung up, Todd twisted around, saw some dangling wires, and understood. He had a digital answering machine, so Lewis and Rawlings hadn't been able to remove a tape. They'd simply taken the entire machine. He shrugged and slowly pushed himself up. The phone, he thought, that reminded him that there was one person in particular he had to call. A call he'd put off for a long time, but which could wait no longer. He had no idea of the time. It was dark outside, dark in his apartment. He stepped into the kitchen, turned on the small light over the stove, and then went to the refrigerator, poured himself a glass of chilled water. Taking a sip, he felt the icy water slide down his throat and slither around the massive knot in his stomach. He reached for the cordless phone, but on second thought he placed it back in its stand, for he needed this call to be absolutely private. He'd once done a piece where the details of a drug ring had been picked up from a cordless phone. Anyone might be listening in now, from the cops to reporters to amateur sleuths. Instead, he dragged the old phone from the kitchen counter and into the dining area, the cord trailing the entire way. Sitting down at his glass dinner table, he cradled his stomach with one hand, took a deep breath, and stared across the dark living room out into the night. At last, he punched in a long-distance number. On the third ring, someone picked up on the other end and said, "Hello." Todd tried to speak, but nothing emerged. It was partly because he was so exhausted, and it was partly out of fear. The voice demanded, "Hello? Who's calling? Anyone there?" Finally, he managed to say, "Hi, Mom. It's me, Todd." "Oh, hello, dear. How are you?" "Not," he coughed, clearing his throat. "Not so good." "Why? What's the matter?" Always the mother, she knew immediately this was serious. "What is it? What's happened?" "Mom," he pictured her down in Florida, just north of Miami, a gray-haired widow in a bright white mobile home. After his dad's death some 5 years ago, she picked up and moved south, sold most of the furniture, and just took off. Never too late for a change, she'd said, and besides, I'm sick of this cold weather. Jiminy, I could slip on some ice and break my hip. Do you know that, Toddy? So she'd moved to a little mobile home park, an enclave of Chicago poles, and in an odd way had seemed to blossom. Todd and his younger brother had talked about it, tried to figure out why she'd mellowed, even gotten nicer, and wondered if there weren't a new man in her life. After all, it couldn't just be shuffleboard, could it? Todd, talk to me. What is it, dear? She said, the concern coming over the lines. There's something I need to tell you. He hoped she was alone. Do you have a minute? Of course. It's about my personal life. He'd imagined this moment. He'd pictured telling her, seen her falling apart in tears, heard her deep Polish moans, maybe even screams. He'd pictured the scene any number of ways, but he had to tell her now, with his name in the papers like this. She was bound to find out anyway, better from him, and he'd stay on the phone as long as she needed, as long as it took to comfort her, to settle her down. God, he didn't want to make her cry. He hated it when his mom cried. He should be doing this in person, of course, or by letter, but there just wasn't time. At least, he thought, his father was dead. At least he didn't have to tell the old man. He would have had a screaming shit fit, maybe taken a swing at Todd. He heard her silence and thought the words, thought them over and over in his head. He clenched his eyes shut, opened his mouth, and finally blurted, Mom, I'm gay. He cringed, waited for the tears, the explosion of anger. Instead, there was silence, and then his mother's voice. Softly, she said, I know. What? But how? Oh, shit, he thought bristling. Did a reporter call you? Someone from the station? What, dear? How do you know, Mom? He demanded. Who told you? No one. I just figured it out a few years ago. You're kidding. So it was just as Michael had said. Mothers were the first to know and the last to find out. No, replied his mother. Remember when I came up that summer? You and Michael took me out to dinner. I guess that's when I knew for sure. I saw you two together, and I just knew you were a couple. This other pain, the one he'd been carrying all his life, suddenly cut itself out of his body. She knew. Jesus Christ, she knew. And then it wasn't Todd's mother who broke down in tears, but Todd. He clenched his eyes, but there was no stopping the pained relief. Todd, dear, it's okay, called his mother. Not to worry. I love you. But, he couldn't believe it. He was crying. He wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to be her, his mom. She was the one who was supposed to be crying. She was the one who was supposed to need help and comforting. Instead, she became the pillar, saying, Not to worry, dear. I've seen Oprah. I understand. What? The oddness of her words made him smile despite himself, and he wiped the tears from his cheeks. Really, I understand. Like any good mother, although right then, as far as Todd was concerned, she was a great one. She added, Todd, I love you. Thanks, Mom. I love you too. He choked on his tears. Couldn't believe how easy it had been. In a flash, he wondered why the hell he hadn't done this years ago. Or was the time only right now? No, that wasn't it. He'd been horribly afraid of hurting and losing her. What about Dad? Was there any way to answer that one? Did he know? Did you two have a talk about it? No, we never did, but in his own way, he probably knew. She was quick to say, He was awfully hard on you. You were the oldest, and he came down so hard on you. I know that. I did what I could. He was just so frustrated, and unfortunately, he took it out on us all. But, Todd, we've talked about that, and you've got to move past it. It sounds odd. God knows your father was no prince. Him and his temper and his vodka. But he was so hard on you all only because he loved you so much. He wanted you to be the best you could be. There's only one thing you need to know. He loved you very much." Trying to sound cheery, she said, "So, you see, everything's all right in the end, isn't it? You have Michael and Mom." He caught his breath as another flow of tears began. There, there's something else. Something horrible's happened." "Oh, God, what?" "Mom, Michael's dead." She was so stunned. She couldn't speak. I, what?" "He was killed. Murdered." "Oh, no. When?" "Last night." But, she mumbled, now bursting into tears. "Why? He was such a nice man." In a flash of realization, Todd saw that all his life he'd been like this damn. Sure, in that way he was just like his dad, this big solid wall holding back the weight of the world, but he couldn't do it anymore. Not by any means. Michael was dead. Everything was crumbling. The dam was forever shattered. And clutching the phone with his mom on the other end, he sobbed like a baby. Swell after swell of tears poured out of him, and he muttered, "Michael was dead. What was he going to do?" They thought he'd done it, but he hadn't. He hadn't. Did she understand? Did she? Of course, she replied. He rambled on, not making any sense, telling her how they'd arrested him, that it was in the papers and everything. Michael was dead, and he'd never cried so hard, not even at his father's funeral. And the more he sobbed, the harder he felt it, nearly writhing with pain and frustration. Finally, he told her, "Mom, I gotta go." "But are you alone, dear? Is there anyone with you?" Janice. Remember? She's coming over soon." "Oh, Todd, I'm so sorry. Should I come up?" No, no, Mom. Listen, I'll call you later." He quickly hung up, dropping the phone into the cradle. He couldn't get up from the chair, though. Instead, he wrapped his arms around himself, clutching himself around the waist. His head fell forward, landing with a thump on the glass tabletop. The tears spilled out of him, and in a way, he thought this was it. He was dying too. And over he muttered, "Michael, Michael." Sometime later, he woke up because of the knocking. Todd opened his eyes, peered around in the darkness, and ascertained that he was at home, not in some prison cell. He blinked, lifted his head from the cold glass table. His eyes felt swollen and achy, his nose wet. Quite obviously, he'd fallen asleep. An extraordinarily deep one, at that. So how long had he slept? Only a matter of minutes, or was it in fact hours? Someone pounded on the door and called, "Todd!" Who was it? Janice? Was Bob still on duty? Could he have let her in downstairs, and was she now out there, the threatened pizza in hand? Just a minute," he called. He stumbled into the kitchen, grabbed the roll of paper towels from atop the refrigerator, ripped off a couple of sheets, and blew his nose. And then he turned on the cold water, let it run, and splashed his face. He was exhausted. What he needed were days of sleep. He should just crawl into bed and not emerge for a week. He was about to open the door when he hesitated, wondering if it was indeed Janice out there, or was this how Michael had been killed? Had someone knocked and he just opened the door and let in a murderer? Or, God, was it Rawlings and Lewis again? They weren't coming back to continue the search, were they? "Who's there?" called Todd. "It's me." It struck him as odd. Sure, he knew the voice, and he leaned forward, looked through the peephole, saw the familiar face. What in the hell did she want? Cindy? Was this day never going to end? Obviously, it was something about work. Probably Lewis and Rawlings had already made it down there, already gone through his office and caught it off his calendar, notes, whatever. So was there a problem? If so, why hadn't she just called? And how had she found out where he lived? Cindy Wilson had never been here before, but perhaps she had retrieved a few of his things, or was coming to see how he was. He twisted the bolt, opened the door, and suddenly was assaulted with a glaring white light. He squinted, raised his right hand over his eyes. Jesus Christ, what's going on? He demanded. Clutching a microphone, she turned her back to him, facing the light. What the flick is going on? How the hell did you get in? He looked at the lights, saw the camera aimed at him. Mark, is that you? Yeah, sorry, buddy. But Todd couldn't believe it. Mark was his pal. Just 2 weeks ago, he'd taken Todd out for a steak dinner. Mark wanted to celebrate that his AIDS test had come back negative. Some 8 years earlier, Mark finally explained as he drank his third martini, he'd done some dope, gone to a very hip, very swinging party in San Francisco, and Mark's voice counted. 3, 2, 1. Good evening. This is Cindy Wilson here at the home of Emmy Award-winning reporter Todd Mills, who last night was arrested for the murder of his gay lover, Michael Carter. Good evening, Todd. How are you? What the hell kind of stunt is this? Todd, can you tell us how long you were involved with Mr. Carter? She asked in her best reporter voice. You were his homosexual lover, were you not? My God, what kind of cheap trick is this? He shouted. Was there a history of violence in your relationship? We understand that the two of you fought the night before Mr. Carter was so brutally knifed to death. Is this true? What? And why did you deceive the management of Channel 7, your co-workers, and all of your loyal viewers? She pressed. Todd, why didn't you tell any of us that you're gay? Unbelievable. He stared at Cindy Wilson, with whom he'd worked for over a year, and he stared at Mark, the cameraman whom he'd known for years. Fucking unbelievable. Good night, he gasped, backing away. But Todd, why did the police arrest you? Called Cindy. What happened? Did you kill Michael Carter? Absolutely not, he yelled. Now get the hell out of here. As he slammed the door, his heart was thumping so hard that he thought he might collapse. He twisted the lock shut, realized he couldn't breathe. Clutching his throat, he gasped for air. And then he heard her voice outside, and he quickly squinted into the peephole and saw the bright light still burning. Shit! She was still out there. The camera was still running live right outside his very own door. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the first glimpse of star reporter Todd Mills since his arrest last night. Stay tuned to Channel 7 for the inside scoop on this tragic story of gay love and gay murder. Trembling, he collapsed to the floor. He knew this trick, ramming a mic into a suspect's face and letting the cameras roll live. It was a crime I trademark, and he had started it. Only now Todd was the fodder, and the public was going to love every second. Eat it up. Gobble him alive. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.